Hi, everyone, and welcome to our event today with the Cyber Guild, which is building an innovative and resilient cybersecurity workforce. We have Liz Green with us, founder of Link Consulting, and Nathan Chung, cybersecurity leader. So I'm going to hand it over to them.
Thank you. Nice to see all of you. We're very excited to be here today and appreciate you all tuning in. So this session is called Building an Innovative and Resilient Cybersecurity Workforce. And we're going to start with just doing some quick intros on who we are. So I'm Liz Green. I'm the founder of Link Consulting. I come from a complete non-cybersecurity background. I'm an occupational therapist. I come more from the human side. I've worked with neurodivergent individuals for 23 years as an occupational therapist, and that's what my company does is we help neurodivergent folks meet the goals that they want to meet. But then we also do business consulting, and we try to help companies be more inclusive of differences in cognitive perspectives. And we are on some grants, including this one project under Virginia Tech under the guidance of Dr. Ariana Schuler-Scott, which is what brings us here today. Nathan, I'll pass it to you for an intro.
Sure. Thanks, Liz. And my name is Nathan Chung. I work in cybersecurity, and my career spans more than 25 plus years in cyber and IT.
Great. And Nathan, don't forget, you are a multi-award winner in the space. You're very well known in both the neurodiversity and cyberspace, which it's a real honor to have you speaking alongside me today. All right, so what we're going to be talking about is a few key things. Cybersecurity threats are on the rise. We know that attackers are using asymmetrical out-of-the-box strategies to break into systems. And we also know there's a need for cognitive diversity to anticipate unexpected threats. And we're going to tell you where to find it. And I should also add here, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will have points where we're going to be pausing for polls and questions. So don't worry about that. But we're hoping to get to all of your questions. Don't hold back on putting them in the chat. And then we will have the points where we answer them. All right. So we're going to start first with just a story talking about the father of computer science, Alan Turing, who a lot of people have likely heard of. So in World War II, Nazi Germany used Enigma machines to encrypt messages and were considered unbreakable. Alan Turing, who happens to be autistic and was a mathematician, he and his team noticed patterns in messages and used Bayesian probability to prioritize likely solutions further automated by the bomb machine to test Enigma combinations. And the result was that there was Enigma message decryption happening daily. And World War II was shortened by 2 to 4 years, and ultimately millions of lives were saved. Nathan, if you could fast forward us to today and talk through this slide, that would be great.
Yep, let's do it. Thank you. So fast forward to today. So today, organizations they still rely heavily on machines to protect them, and sadly, it makes people overconfident. They think that they have all these cyber defenses, firewalls, anti-malware, and back when I first started in computers, it was good enough. But in today's world, it's not enough. We cannot rely on the cybersecurity tools. Like, we cannot just invest millions of dollars into cyber tools and expect, oh, we're protected. As you can see from the slide, the attacks are still happening. Like Microsoft, there was a flaw in Windows 2000/XP that you can think of it as a predictable pattern. When the bad guys can see a predictable pattern, they can exploit it and they can easily get in. The Rocky also used weak password. Sony Chat had a flaw in that led to predictable digital signatures. The LinkedIn attack used weak passwords, and the Mirai botnet that harvested default credentials in IoT devices. So just relying on technology alone is a weakness.
And so then now we're highlighting some problems with this. So problem one is that threats are evolving. We see an increase in complexity and expanded threat surfaces. So attackers are using asymmetrical out-of-the-box strategies to break into systems. The strategies used often involve social engineering tactics. They're exploiting less common vulnerabilities, and they're leveraging unexpected methods to gain access to systems. Cyber criminals are using nonlinear thinking to bypass security measures, and they often experiment, break rules, and look for patterns that others miss, therefore exploiting predictability in structured systems and security teams. So that's problem one. Problem two is talent. So if you have conventional thinking and problem solving, you are at risk as a cybersecurity team. Traditional security methods fall short when hackers exploit patterns and predictability. There's this over-reliance on automated security protocols without human adaptability. There's a lack of, creative problem solving and compliance-driven teams, and a failure to anticipate emerging cyber threats due to linear thinking. Nathan, we added this bullet, AI is not the end all be all. I would love for you to comment on that, especially, as it relates to talent and this kind of traditional thinking mindset, which leaves people at risk. So could you tell me your opinion on the risks that many companies are taking when they are kind of over relying on AI within their cyber teams or these more traditional protocols?
Absolutely. So today the big buzzword all over the news is AI. So of course, a lot of the security tools we use today are starting to have AI built into it. For example, the Microsoft tools I've used, such as Sentinel, they have AI built into it more and more. Great, wonderful. It is helping to address the thousands upon thousands of events at organizations that would normally overwhelm a human, that leading to burnout. So the plus side is AI is helping with that. The downside is people, just like the Enigma machines, people tend to get complacent. They start to think with AI, it will solve the problems and they can cut back on the humans. I disagree, because the more and more relying machines will be essentially repeating history, where we are over reliant on AI, just like the Germans did with the Enigma machines. And once we are too dependent and over reliant, we get complacent, and the bad guys have an easier time to get in.
All right. And so what then we would say is that cybersecurity success depends on how teams think. So when you have different cognitive styles that allow teams to predict, analyze, and counteract threats more effectively, and you have different thinking styles that identify unique vulnerabilities and attack vectors. When you have all of that, you see teams that combine detailed thinkers and big picture strategies and rapid responders. They're going to outperform rigid and uniform teams. So you can see some examples here of some different neurodivergent conditions, which is a term we're going to start talking about now, and how these individuals often can outperform what we call neurotypical people who don't have any sort of condition or difference in how they think, and they kind of fit in the norms. That neurodivergent individuals can outperform neurotypical, and you can see some of the examples of that. So Nathan, I'm wondering for you as an autistic individual, where if you could kind of give some examples of how you think has promoted you to outperform in the space of cybersecurity, to really be able to think outside the box and problem solve quicker than, say, neurotypical only teams might. So if you could just give some personal examples, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So I'm very openly neurodivergent with autism, ADHD. We sadly live in a society where these conditions are demonized. People think it's bad, and that since I have a disability, I'm not a good worker. In reality, I have a competitive advantage in the cybersecurity space. It's one great story. It's from years ago when I was working in this security operations center and trying to manage security incidents. I remember one day, one of our execs at one company, he was getting locked out of his iPhone. So when this happens, of course, all hands on deck. Everyone dives into the security log to try to determine what happened. Is this a cyber attack? So after looking at the logs, maybe 1 to 2 hours, I was able to pattern match and identify really quickly that what was happening is the exec had a saved cache password on his iPhone, and that led to the lockouts. It was not a cyber attack at all. It was just a lot of just user error. in comparison, a teammate who's trained and used to work at the NSA, who is 10 years my senior, who knows a lot of more knowledge than me. It took him doing the same thing. It took him literally the entirety of all day. It took him all day long to come to the exact same conclusion. So from what we can determine from this, I was able to detect what was going on and to respond to this incident a lot quicker than someone who is neurotypical, who had more advanced knowledge. Because in cybersecurity, detection is key. The sooner you can detect what's going on and respond, it makes a difference. It can make a difference between limiting the damage or a full-blown data breach that you see in the news.
That is such a powerful story. I'm just wondering, Nathan, did you, at the company that you mentioned, had you disclosed your neurodivergence there?
So this was earlier in my journey. So I always knew I was different, but back then I had no diagnoses, but I'm not alone. There are a lot of people like me out there in the world and in the technology and cybersecurity workforces, but many of us are not even aware that we have these conditions, because I spent most of my life and career not knowing, but I just knew that I was different and I was able to apply my skills.
Yeah. And do you feel like you being able to problem solve quicker than the person that had more experience, was that acknowledged within your organization?
No, it was not, because sometimes on cybersecurity and IT teams, sometimes there are resentment or how you say, jealousy, because it's like, oh, I know I can do better than you. I think I know more than you. So sometimes it does create resentment, unfortunately. However, it does ram home the next point. You do need a supportive team and a supportive manager, because a good manager will recognize your value and support you.
Yeah, that's a great point, which leads us in nicely to the next slide, which is really the solution here that we wanted to talk to you today about. Is obviously neurodivergent talent is crucial for anticipating unexpected threats. Cybersecurity requires exceptional problem solving, pattern recognition, and rapid adaptability, which are skills that are found within many neurodivergent professionals. You want to make sure you're not overlooking them by utilizing outdated hiring and training methods. And we're going to help you figure out how to do that without having to hinge anything on disclosure. And this is where universal design comes in, which is a principle we're going to be talking about. It basically removes unnecessary barriers and unlocks higher performance. And the great thing about it is it's helpful for all employees. It's critical for some, but it's helpful for all. So even in this current climate, these types of strategies will help everyone. So Nathan, I'm wondering, since we were talking about neurodiversity, a lot of people might not be familiar with it, but if you would mind kind of sharing the definition of it with the group.
Sure, absolutely. So neurodiversity is equals to cognitive diversity. Just think natural variations in the way humans act and think. I like to use the X-Men analogy. It's a natural progression of how brains are different. This can include self-identification or with or without a medical diagnosis. And it focuses on skill and strengths, not weaknesses, because ideally, just thinking of the word disability is as a negative connotation. We need to focus on skills and strengths, and also we need to be able to accommodate and support people, because everyone's different. Because this leads to talent recruitment, innovation, creativity, increased growth, and ROI. In short, it's a competitive advantage, and people like me make a difference.
And then terms here, would you mind describing the terms, the difference between neurodiverse and then neurodivergent or neurodistinct?
Yep. So some typical based on the graph, I'm not time reading that, but as you can see from the graph, there's less typical, more typical, more typical, and less typical. Yep, you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, and so basically, just to kind of segue, you can see there's fewer people that hit the edges of the bell curve, the more divergent thinkers. The society kind of, if we were to map everybody's skills out, like what is, if you were to basically assess people's profiles, you would see a larger grouping of people that hit more in the middle, which is like why you see a greater number of people going up in that bell curve. And that's in medicine, we call it neurotypical. But then on the edges, people who may have more of a spiky profile, more unique in their skill sets. And when I say spiky, I mean really, really good at certain skills, way above average. And then maybe challenges in others. So you see this up, down, whereas the rest of us who kind of are in the neurotypical space, we come out in the average range. And also, just to add here, we are all humans are neurodiverse because we all think differently. We don't all think the same. When we're talking about the edge of the bell curve, though, we're talking about a different terminology, which is where you hear the terms like neurodivergent, neurodistinct, neurovariant. And so it's important also to kind of know your terms here. So go ahead, Nathan.
Yep, absolutely. So that at least 20% of the adult population is neurodistinct. In fact, consider that, like, for example, autism, 2.2% of the US population is estimated to have autism. ADHD, 4.4%, that's roughly 10 million. Anxiety, 40 million, that's 15%. Dyslexia, 43.5 million, 19%. And dyspraxia, 32.9 million, 10%. That's a lot of adults who have these conditions. And we're out there, and a lot of us may not even be aware that we have these conditions because we mask, we hide it.
Mm-hmm. And you can see the numbers, the percentages are way above 20. But that's the kind of conservative estimate or kind of accepted estimate within the population. So yes, you can basically guarantee that, like, what this means is that this is not a case of like, oh, I knew somebody once that I used to work on a team with. This is neurodiversity is in every group that I interface with. It's probably in my family. It's probably in my friend group. It's probably in my teams. So this is really about accepting that that is there. And then now what do we do about it?
Okay, so next, neurodiversity, it's an umbrella term covering multiple conditions. The top one that would always come to mind for people is autism and ADHD, but it's so much more than that. Dyscalculia, dyslexia, Tourette's, mental health conditions, and more.
Mm-hmm. And the cool thing here with this graphic too is, as opposed to the medical model where, if you have an autism diagnosis, what you generally hear is the problems. What this graphic and what the neurodiversity movement are about is showing the strengths. So just like we were talking about with cybersecurity teams, autistic individuals, for example, have unique strengths that neurotypical people don't. And so that is important to call out. And that's really where the movement originated, is the idea of like, hey, instead of it all being like our deficits, why don't we think about the fact that we actually have unique strengths, and maybe society needs to do more to be accepting. So we're going to switch to any questions. We've been talking for a while. So if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. And then we would like to offer a poll out. We would like to know your perception of your team's cognitive diversity on a scale of 1, meaning no cognitive diversity, to 5, lots of cognitive diversity. And we'll just give it a minute. Nathan, since I can't see the chat, if there's anything that pops up, please go for it.
Yep, absolutely.
Is the poll released?
Yep, it's moving. Okay, it looks like about average. Most of the correspondence is 1 or 3s.
Oh, okay. Is that surprising to you, Nathan?
Yeah, it is a bit surprising.
So you're expecting to see more diversity of kind of how people are thinking within teams?
Yes.
Yeah.
And next we'll dive into why and what's going on.
Yeah. So this is I think these stats are really powerful. Knowing that 25% of the population has a disability, so neurodiversity can fall under that. Whether or not you use the term disability, obviously, is everybody's unique choice. A lot of employers are encouraging disclosure, 93%, but less than 5% of people disclose. And Nathan, I would love to hear if you would cover this slide on why the disclosure rates are as low as they are.
Yes, absolutely. So high level, a lot of people are just not even aware that they have these conditions like ADHD and whatnot. They also have a lot of previous negative experiences at work or school, because I'm not gonna lie, sometimes at some workplaces are very toxic, where people are bullied or treated unfairly or even terminated from their jobs, all because they disclose their disability or even have visible traits. Next, there are communication challenges. Some people who are neurodivergent are non-speaking. They cannot express their needs or communicate with their teams effectively. In general, one of the biggest ones of all is just the negative stigma around it's the word disability. It's negative. It has been having a negative connotation throughout pretty much all of time. This leads to a lot of people to mask, hide who they are, and just try to fit themselves into a box to try to fit in each day, which is exhausting. This can lead to long-term employment issues, such as turnover or just poor engagement, because if we can't be who we truly are, it leads to burnout. I liken it to trying to run a server on a laptop, in a virtual machine on a laptop. It eventually will crash. So when you mask. So, but at a higher level, just similar to the X-Men, just being different, at the very least, it makes people uncomfortable, and at most, it can make some people hostile.
Really hard.
Okay, next, lack of psychological safety contributes to lack of disclosure. Psychological safety is so very, very important to whether or not a person chooses to disclose or work efficiently. Okay. I can't see.
Sorry, go ahead, Nathan.
Yep. I can't see the slides. If you can read that.
Oh, you can't see it in the slides?
It's tiny, sorry.
Okay, I'll review it then. And a lot of people may have never heard the term psychological safety, but really what it relates to is a person feeling safe to disagree or counter the status quo without fear of repercussion. And that is what truly makes a team psychologically safe versus not. And so one of the great authors and speakers on this topic, Dr. Amy Edmondson out of Harvard, she's, if you're interested in learning more about psychological safety and really how crucial it is for high performing teams, it is very valuable to read. For example, the Challenger tragedy in the, what was that, 80s, 90s? Now I can't remember exactly
80s.
What 80s. One of the reasons for the mistakes that were made were that the team was not feeling safe to speak up. Same thing happened with Volkswagen, and you've heard about that situation that happened a few years ago now that led to a lot of challenges with people being transparent on, I think it was like emissions types of issues and stuff coming out. But basically what we're trying to drive home here is how important it is when it comes to disclosure for there to be psychological safety. And the graphic, if you can't see it, what it's doing is highlighting factors rated to what's the very important kind of features of what people look for when they're deciding to disclose versus factors rated very important when they're deciding not to disclose. And the supervisor relationship is crucial. If a person does not trust their supervisor and have rapport with them, they're not going to share anything. And so that's what we're trying to highlight here. And then pivoting into, because we've talked about this business case, we've talked about what neurodiversity is, in the tech space especially, there's been a lot of initiatives, hiring initiatives, where companies have seen, okay, because there's a business case here, we see we're going to make more money if we hire neurodivergent talent. There have been large companies who have created hiring initiatives, such as Microsoft, SAP. SAP actually headlined kind of one of the first hiring initiatives in 2013. And if any company wanted to create their own, there's a playbook online that you could follow that gives some great strategies on what are the steps that you need to take, such as having senior leader buy-in and all sorts of steps. What this graphic is meant to depict, though, is, again, the business case for hiring neurodivergent talent. This comes down to money. So it's not just, yes, we've got people that are better at cybersecurity tasks, but also there's been like HP, DXC Technology. There was a project done in Australia. They found that neurodivergent talent were 30% more productive. There's other companies that have found, like a software bug detection company I've consulted for, their neurodivergent teams were outperforming the competition and achieving higher net promoter scores than neurotypical by 56%. There was a recent Gartner poll that found that by 2027, 20% of employees recruited by Fortune 500 sales organizations to improve business goals will be neurodivergent. So you can see this across the board business case. And also in Israel and Australia, in their defense forces, there's actually been recruitment of autistic talent above neurotypical because they're seeing that they excel at cybersecurity analysis. So this isn't charity. This isn't fitting the category of like, oh, we should because it's crossing our D's and dotting our I's. If there's a business case, there's an imperative to this if a company wants to get ahead. So Nathan, if you could cover this slide, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So what is the advantage of hiring cybersecurity talent, neurodiversity talent in the cybersecurity space? It typically involves pattern recognition, attention to detail, problem solving, analytical skills, independent thinking, spatial reasoning, hyper-focus, loyalty, and honesty. So what does this translate to in a cybersecurity world? Think of it this way: a hacker or attacker, when they attack or do a pen test, they could find creative ways to break into an organization or bypass their firewalls. Or for detection, think of it like a SOC analyst could think of new ways to identify a pattern of an attacker, determine what is going on, and respond quickly. Okay. So on this slide, here are some examples of amazing cybersecurity champions that support neurodiversity: Holly Foxcroft, Kat Cantillo, Devin Nakano, Tia Hopkins, Lisa Ventura, Penny Hooper, David Balbat, and Nico Chesno. These amazing individuals understand the importance of neurodiversity in the cybersecurity field, and they are amazing examples of what can be done to help foster neurodiversity talent in the workplace and to help people like me thrive.
Great. All right. Any questions or comments?
Oh, and there's a really good question in the chat. They're asking, are there good reasons not to disclose? And there is actually, because from my experience, depending on the organization, the level of support for neurodivergent talent will vary greatly. Some organizations will be more supportive, but some will be hostile, very much hostile to it. So my big advice for people is to take your time when you join an organization, feel it out first to see. Like, for example, if an organization is hostile towards people in general, they will probably be very hostile towards people with disabilities and those who disclose.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the thing too, is I think every company, I mean, you saw that stat of like 93% of employers, there is a route to disclosure. It's not that the route's not there, but the rates are low because people often don't feel safe sharing. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want there to be a likelihood that there's some repercussion. They won't be able to advance. There is such a negative stigma around it. And so I have my own clients that I see it. I never tell people to disclose unless they feel safe and comfortable doing it. And that's really where it's feeling it out within the organization. Like if you have a manager, and this is where we're going to talk about some ways of kind of creating a little bit of that safety. If nobody talks about mental health in your team, your managers, the senior leaders, nobody's vulnerable. There's no like, hey, we get what you're going through. This is stressful. It's all just work. Generally, people don't really feel safe. But if you see somebody leading by example where it's okay to talk, it's okay to be real, to question things, that's oftentimes an indicator of like, well, it might work. I might be able to do this, but it's a very personal decision for a lot of people. Any other questions?
Yep. Another really good question about, they're asking me, how have you come to your own approach to work-life balance while advocating for others? So that's a great question. So I'm not going to lie. Some jobs in cybersecurity are very intense that require working long hours, sometimes on weekends, especially when there's an incident happening. It all comes down to, number one, choosing a cybersecurity job where you're happy and you're comfortable with. Because one thing which a lot of people don't talk about is autistic burnout. One of the contributors to that is doing a job that you don't like. I'm lucky in my current role where I do risk assessments and identify cybersecurity threats. So I'm comfortable in my role. So my risk about burnout is still there, but it's reduced. And as for work-life balance, there's what's called spoon theory. You can think of it like the battery in your phone. You ideally want to balance your life where you spend time with family and at the same time you address your work commitments, all the while keeping an eye on your personal battery, make sure you don't burn out, be exhausted and crash. So it requires a lot of work. And to be honest, I don't always do a great job with that, but it requires a lot of planning, patience, and just monitoring your personal battery level.
I love that, Nathan. I use that with my client. I'm wondering for you, because one of the things I feel like have the hardest time with is determining like what are the activities that actually give you back some battery power. Like we tend to, oftentimes if we're pointing to things, we're like, yeah, I know that drained me. That was awful, right? But the hard part is then, okay, what do we do that helps us gain some battery back? Do you have any advice on that?
Well, the biggest one of all is take vacations. And also take breaks. Like,
yeah,
it's hard, like, because of my ADHD. Sometimes when you're in the zone and you're completely focused, I can get a lot of work done, but the problem is I can forget to eat or sleep. Mm-hmm. So sometimes to counter that, I had to force myself to take breaks. For example, what a lot of people don't know is within Windows 11, there's a built-in accessibility tool. It's called like a Pomodoro timer.
Yeah.
You can set it so like if you work 1 hour, force yourself to work no more than 55 minutes and take a 5-minute break after that. And it's built right into Windows 11.
I love that. I use that too. The other cool thing that I've heard from people always have these great workarounds is if you want to cue yourself to stop working, don't just put it on your phone right next to you because you're probably going to ignore it, but like put it on a really obnoxious timer, like the microwave, where you have to actually get up and break your focus to go turn the thing off. Like that's also important, especially if you get in the hyper focus mode.
Absolutely. Got another really good question. They work at a environment that is we call it where they don't feel psychologically safe. So any advice on how to make it better?
Oof, that's hard. What do you think, Nathan?
Ooh, yeah, that's hard. Number one, for the person, I feel for you, and I've worked in some hostile environments myself. So number one, take care of your health, and at the same time, you got to balance, because I'm not gonna lie, for some individuals, they have difficult situations where they feel they have to work or make the difference between working and having an income or being homeless. That's sad reality for some people in some backgrounds. But the biggest one of all is balance it out. If you can rough it out, do what you can, because the sad reality for some people, once they disclose or there's even a feel that you have a disability, it can lead to bullying or even wrongful termination. It happens. I've heard so many stories. But the other piece to it is sometimes it's internal. Sometimes, like growing up, I was just so afraid to speak out about anything because I didn't feel confident in my own abilities. So that is something to also consider. Is it internal or external? For me, a lot of it was internal and finding my own voice and speaking your truth.
That's great advice. Yeah. And also getting help, if that's not a safe environment, not everybody has the luxury of just quitting and looking for something else, but getting some support. I mean, I'm going to put my email at the end, but like, that's what I do is I help people with transition, in finding a better environment for them, whatever that looks like, because you deserve to be respected. So we'll have some more time for questions, but I want to make sure we can get into kind of these actionable starting points. Where can you start no matter who you are? And one of the biggest things that I see value in, like I said, especially these days, is the idea of building in strategies that are beneficial for everyone, but are really critical for some. And this is where you're thinking about in the workplace, like what are things that we can do to show that we actually care about employees and that not everybody thinks the same way. So for example, if applying for a job, it would be great if I saw on the job description, if it said, if you have any accommodations requests at all, we don't expect disclosure. We want to make the interview as tolerable and enjoyable as possible. So please let us know, if you have any questions or accommodations needs, no disclosure. Like, that's great. That's helpful for anyone. Flexibility with scheduling work days. I mean, this is where I think the real challenge lies now with if there's forced back to work and things like that. Everybody enjoys having some autonomy in how they do their work and when. Now, some of this stuff is outside of our control, right? So then it's even if there are these kind of bigger policy strategy things that we don't have in our control, given the current space, there's still other things too. And that's what we're going to talk about too. But if we look across the employee life cycle, across the board, where is the job description, for example, on the website? How easy is it to find? How easy is it to read? What does the website look like? If the messaging on the website is like, well, we do happy hours on Fridays and it's got a group of people all like joined together, tightly knit, it conveys a message of like, this is how we want our organization to look. And we want these kinds of people to be there, which is fine if that's your organizational decision. But if you do want diversity of thought, it's important to also offer variation in like the types of things that you do and the messaging. So having people internal to your company who may have different perspectives, looking at the messaging that you're providing outwardly is very important. Great. I love a pop-up right in front of me. So one of the things that our project, what we've been seeking to do is one of the most inclusive hiring practices that there are for anyone is doing skills showcasing rather than the traditional interview. Now, if you're hiring for a sales role and you need somebody to kind of sell themselves in the interview setting, sure, the interview is great. But if they're being hired for, say, a cyber related role, does it matter necessarily as much what they say as what they can do? Can you give them projects that show their skills? And this is where that's another really great hiring method that helps everybody kind of get to the point of like, who is this person and what's their value and how can we take advantage of it? Onboarding is also a really crucial area. One of the best practices that I've seen came out of a company that really sought to recruit and hire neurodivergent talent. Because of the business case, they came up with something called a biodex, which you can Google. And it's basically an employee user manual. So every employee who signs on to the company fills out this form that's like, this is how I prefer communication. I like heads down time during this time. If you need to get in touch with me, you can do this. But it's a way of kind of level setting where everybody sort of knows, oh, I see. Like I this person prefers email versus me just picking up the phone and calling them, I'm going to do that. And it just kind of helps people get along better. I had one cyber manager that I spoke to once who he was like, it took me about 1.5 years to realize my employee did not like it when I just texted. And in my mind, I'm like, why did it take so long? But also, like, this is just where it's important to talk to the employees about, like, how do you prefer communication? What can we do to make this a little easier? Nathan, do you have any, I'm wondering your opinion on any of these kind of universal design strategies that have really stood out to you. And what would be really interesting is to hear like types of strategies that you recommend depending on the field within cybersecurity. But as a starting point, what are some of your kind of top recommended universal design strategies?
Ooh, long list. So when I worked at one large organization once, when I applied and wanted to interview for them, one of the things that just blew my mind is in the email to schedule the interview, there was this big button that says essentially, if you need an accommodation for the interview, just let us know. You don't have to disclose. That was the first time in my entire long career in cyber tech that I've ever seen that, and that made me so much more comfortable. So, for example, one of the things I ask for is questions that can be interview questions ahead of time because I have crazy anxiety. So, have any questions ahead of time, anxiety away. And number two, the biggest one is there's some organizations, they love to have these huge panel interviews where you have like 6 or 7 people in at once, and they just do a marathon of those all day. So instead, I asked them to limit to just 1 or 2 people and to spread out the interview over a number of days. And number 3, I very much enjoyed how some organizations, they let me demonstrate my skills instead of asking me questions like, what is SSL? What is a firewall? Instead, they gave me scenario-based questions that allow me to demonstrate for them how I would address, say, a cybersecurity incident. That alone was a better demonstration of my skills than just asking me random questions like, what is X?
Interesting. I'm wondering if you were to think about, like, say, cyber operations roles, would there be any strategies that you feel would be really crucial to incorporate based on those types of roles? Like whether it's a different way of hiring or interviewing or onboarding. I kind of want to ask about each of the separate fields, including cyber ops, GRC, and emerging tech.
It depends on which field. Example, for cybersecurity operations, if I had to say in the interview process, I would give the person being interviewed essentially a kind of like a simulation to say, this is what the logs say, interpret these logs and tell us what's going on. Or for a GRC, they can use a scenario, like, for example, guide us through how you would audit a customer, doing say a PCI DSS audit, and what kind of questions you would use and what you would address first. Essentially, it's scenario based to help the candidate to show you what they can do. I think for the organizations I've gone through that embrace that, it was so much easier compared to random, tell me about yourself.
Oh yeah, that's just like, well, what do you want me to say? If it's this vague question. I love that. That's great. And then because I want to make sure to save some more time for questions, here's a few other easy workplace adjustments. For example, in meetings, I mean, simple things like we all benefit from closed captioning, which you can, hopefully you've seen the button if you need it. You can press closed caption for this very session. Having a written agenda and following it for meetings. You know, I've heard a lot of people say, like, when people start talking about all sorts of random topics, it's very confusing. So it's just clarity. Like, that's what this is. And making sure that onboarding is clear, using tools like avoiding buzzwords. I love this one because I feel like there's even a difference in speak, you know, when you're in a senior level role versus a frontline role. I remember Googling things that I had heard senior leaders say to me, and I'm like, I don't know what you mean by that. Speak in my language, right? This also relates to adapting communication, slow down, simple things, right? All right, so we're gonna have, this is the second poll here, and we'd love to see what strategies you would find most valuable. Pick your top 3. And then also, if you have any questions, again, feel free to enter them, and Nathan can go for it, answering them.
Yep. So yeah, while we put the poll results, looking through the chat, a really good question. Let's see. Do opportunities exist for people to enter this field at different points in life? Must you have a bachelor's degree? Is on-the-job training available? If a neurodivergent person wants to try working in cybersecurity age 30 or 60, how could they best enter? That's a great question.
What do you think, Nathan?
So I'm not going to lie. Entering the field is very challenging. Like the days when a person just have Security Plus and just have people begging for them to work for them, that those days are gone. Nowadays, the walls have gone higher, where nowadays you need more like a CISSP and be able to demonstrate your skills. One of the biggest tips that nobody really told me when I first started out was the need to build your brand. Because think about it, when you apply for a job, there are dozens, if not hundreds of people applying for that job. There is a need to differentiate. When I applied for one organization and interviewed, they were very straight with me. They didn't hire me because my 25 plus years of experience or my 20 or so certifications. They hired me because what differentiated me from the rest of the people is my volunteer work, my work with a nonprofits, helping women and people who are neurodivergent. That it made me that allowed me to differentiate myself, and that allowed me to stick out. What do you think, Liz?
Definitely. I love that advice. I think one of the things I've heard recently, and to be transparent with this project, the initial goal was that we were going to do a reverse job fair. So we were going to match employers to talent in Virginia, Maryland, DC. And the challenge actually was finding employers who had roles. And so we've now had to pivot more towards this being like a mentoring event. So we still wanted to provide value to the talent. But what it says to me is if it's that hard to find roles, especially for entry level or career, transitioning careers, then one of the things that I've heard recently is people really have to develop actually their entrepreneurial skills, because this is about getting out there, networking. Like I heard somebody say, if you know of a firm that has, maybe they don't even have a cybersecurity team, and you say, they're around the corner, I will do a risk assessment for you. It's getting yourself out there. Now that is extremely stressful oftentimes for neurodivergent folks, but like Nathan, one thing I will say with you is you are so impressive with that in your social media presence and the amount of speaking you do. And I'm wondering, like, I can imagine networking and the building your brand part might be very stressful. Like, how have you been able to work through that? Like, how do you navigate that? And which has really brought you to where you are today, speaking in front of people all the time and networking with people and stuff.
Thanks. My big advice for people is to get started, because one thing I struggled with, especially when I was younger, is perfectionism, like trying to have that perfect brand, perfect everything. But my big advice, get started and start differentiating yourself. And that's for the job hunt and getting into cyber. You can demonstrate your skills, because there are still jobs out there, especially for those who are willing to put in the time and effort to learn and to demonstrate your skills. Like do CTFs, like capture the flag, try hack me, because if you can demonstrate your skills, you will have an easier time. Oh, another great question in the chat came in. What strategies have you seen be effective in helping senior leaders to understand the need to provide flexibility so that you and all cybersecurity professionals can stay resilient? Ooh, that's a good question. I think right off the top of my head is you need to be psychologically safe enough to be able to communicate your needs. Like for many of you I'm guessing some of you are going to be parents, so you have to take care of kids or you have to take care of your parents. It's hard work sometimes to balance your career and take care of your home responsibilities. So if you feel psychologically safe, then you can tell your manager something's going on at home. I need flexibility. I need to be able to work from home like one day a week or 2 days a week. Or you need to take your kid to school. You need to have flexible working arrangements. In short, you need to be safe and have the working relationship with your manager where you feel safe enough to express your needs. How do you feel this?
Yeah, 100% agree. And this kind of moves into this, like, how do I become an ally, no matter who I am? The biggest out of all of this list, I would say the biggest one that strikes, kind of hits home for me, especially if I'm thinking as a senior leader, like, what's the starting point? Leading by example, asking questions, being vulnerable. So I've spoken to many managers, and one of the conversations that I had stood out in that the person said, I don't feel comfortable talking about neurodiversity, so I don't say anything. If people want to come ask me questions, they can, but I don't want to say the wrong thing, so they don't. And that's actually kind of the silence part is the biggest risk. In fact, you don't have to know everything. It's just really about starting. Like when I think about leaders that I've read about, Richard Branson, for example, very outward with being dyslexic. It is that showing the vulnerability, the I don't know, is like the number one starting point that I would recommend, of just like, you don't have to know all the answers. You could say, I went to this session. I am learning about this. I know things are super stressful right now. I want to make it safe for people to talk. Like, what do I need to know? What can I do to make things better? And listen. Listening is the most important thing. So we're going to end it with Nathan, if you want to kind of briefly. Nathan pulled these great quotes, reputable people, driving again home the idea of why neurodiversity is so imperative in the workplace.
Absolutely. First one from Steve Jobs. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward, and while some may see them as crazy ones, we see genius, because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do. In short, you want amazing people who are neurodivergent, because they can do things differently, they can see things differently. And next, Sam Altman. We used to put a premium on how much knowledge you had collected in your brain, and if you were a fact collector, that made you smart and respected. And now I think it's much more valuable to be a connector of dots than a collector of facts. That if you can synthesize and recognize patterns, you have an edge. Guess what? Divergent people are really good at pattern recognition. So in AI and cybersecurity, we have an advantage.
That's great. And then quickly, this is just thinking about starting points. Where would you like to start? Which will populate. And Elizabeth, if you can put the last poll in as well, just so people have time to fill out. We really would love your response and how you received this presentation, if you liked it or not, and what else that you would like more support on. So I just want to make sure that last and final poll gets out. That's a private poll where we can get a rating from you of what you thought about this. And while we still have 3 minutes left, while people are doing that, are there any other questions that we want to cover? I loved the conversation today. I thought that, the questions were fantastic. Nathan, are you seeing anything?
No.
All right. This is my information. Please feel free to email me. We really appreciate your time and participating in this session. And if there's anything that, we can do to support you in your journey, whether you're a senior leader or a job seeker or a frontline employee, we're really appreciative, especially these days, to get people attending these kinds of sessions, which really, I think, show the value of diverse cognitive perspectives to the bottom line of companies. This is not a choice, it's an imperative. So definitely appreciate everybody joining.
Absolutely.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's a good one.
Yep. And another thing I want to like to point out, even without disclosure, it is estimated that roughly half the tech and cybersecurity workforce are neurodivergent. We're just really good at hiding.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you so much to everyone for joining, and thank you so much to both Liz and Nathan. We will have a recording of this available if you want to be able to view it again or share it with others you know who weren't able to join. So thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.